Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica, and I'm the Assistant Fellowship Director for CEEP. Today, we're going to go through the Living Room Conversations training on creating civil dialogue. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I wanted to talk about a couple learning outcomes that we hope you get out of this training. First, we hope that you will learn how to create an environment that promotes civil political dialogue. We hope that you'll be able to have political conversations that lead to civil dialogue, and you will be able to find common ground with the participants of that conversation. We also hope that you will learn how to adapt these guidelines and tools to different situations, people, and conversations. So, why is talking about voting so difficult? Talking about politics and voting can be really hard, especially with someone you've never met before or someone who has a different view than you. The goal of this training is to learn how to find common ground and encourage civil dialogue surrounding political issues and voting as a whole. Framing voting as exercising your civic duty or raising your voice to weigh in on political topics that concern you can be an effective way to change any preconceived notions that people you're talking with might have about the subject. It can be hard to establish that with passerbys who you only have a small 30-second conversation with, but I think that each small conversation will make a big difference, and it shows one more person that you can have a civil dialogue surrounding political issues. So, why living room conversations? We call these living room conversations because living rooms are a place where people gather to socialize and relate to one another. When you invite someone into your home or into your living room, it's a sign that they are truly valued and respected. So our modern world no longer has limitations on places to physical locations. But something powerful can happen when we connect face to face with each other, whether that's on a Zoom meeting or at an in-person event, and listen to each other's perspectives. That's why we'd like to cover this in our training today. We want everyone to feel welcome here. If people feel respected, they're more likely to give respect in return, thus opening them up to new ideas as they begin to find common ground in their conversations. Before we start, I want to establish a few guidelines. You can adapt these as well for your gatherings or for maybe an online event that you have, or even if you message someone over social media. The first one is to be curious and open to learning. Conversation is as much about listening as it is about talking and responding. So enjoy hearing all points of view and maintain an attitude of exploration and curiosity about what the other person has to say. Show respect and suspend judgment. We tend to judge one another, but we ask that you do your best not to. Setting judgments aside opens you up to learning from that other person, and it also makes them feel very heard and respected and that their perspective is appreciated. Find common ground, but also note the differences. I think looking for common ground in your conversations shows that you guys really aren't that different, but it's also important to note the differences in how you have that conversation or how those common values show themselves. Be authentic and welcome that from others. So share what's important to you, speak authentically about the things that you are passionate about in a nonpartisan manner, so that would be voting in this scenario, and be considerate of others who are doing the same. Be purposeful and to the point. So notice if what you are conveying is or is not pertinent to the topic at hand. And if you're administering one of these conversations, ideally you would bring the conversation back to the original topic if it starts to go off on a different route. And lastly, own and guide the conversation. So take responsibility for the quality of your participation and of that conversation. And like I said before, if the conversation starts to go off track, bring it back on track and make sure that you cover everything you wanted to. Okay, so today we have a couple of participants here who are going to go through some of these topics with us. We're going to go through two topics today, and then we're also going to go through a reflection at the end of each topic. And then we'll also talk about how you can take these conversations and what you learned in these conversations to um, your events. The first topic that I want to cover today is the America we want to be. So, the Declaration of Independence has a famous statement that says, "We are endowed with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." However, when this was written in 1776, it did not include everyone. There are many views about this statement. Some say that we've made great progress towards inclusion of everyone who lives in this country. Others point to how far we still need to go. Some people believe that focusing on the past prevents us from moving forward, but other people think we still need to come to terms with our history. So that's what we're going to be covering today. Before we do that, I want to introduce some of our participants here. So I already mentioned I am Jessica. I am the Assistant Fellowship Director at Campus Election Engagement Project, and I attended Iowa State University. And then I'm passionate about the work we do with CEEP because I think that young people and college students are the future. And I think that the issues they care about most are often overlooked in our political system. And I think if they were to vote more regularly, that could be changed. So, Daniel, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and pass it off?
Yeah, of course. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Coley. I'm the Georgia Director for the Campus Election Engagement Project. Um, School is Kennesaw State University in Northwest Georgia, and I'm very passionate about CEEP because I believe that our work with engaging the youth, getting the youth vote out in college campuses. The youth vote is just so consequential in deciding and building the country that we want to see in the future and the country that we are all going to grow up in. And I think that it's so important for everyone to be engaged at all ages. All eligible voting members of our country all deserve to have their voice heard.
Erica, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Erica Tai. I use she, her pronouns. I am one of the faculty resource interns for CEEP this summer. I'm a graduate student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And my passion for CEEP is really uh, at the crux of what I do for it, in that I think it's a really cool opportunity for those of us like myself who are policy oriented but on higher education tracks and who want to work in higher education, to sort of fuse those interests together in a way that increases student voice and student engagement in voting and election related activities. So that's really exciting to me, and that's why I'm passionate about being here.
Awesome, thank you. And then lastly, we have Ella. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ella Lawson. I'm a fellows intern, and I go to the University of Mississippi. I care a lot about CEEP because not only does it encourage students to vote, but it gives students the resources to in turn encourage other students to vote. So it really puts students at the heart of its work and enables them to become leaders in their own community.
Cool. Those are all great answers why you're passionate. Thank you for sharing those, you guys. Um, our first round is not going to be on our topic that I mentioned earlier. It's going to be questions surrounding like who you are and what you kind of want to see in this world, which are also pretty deep questions, I guess. So let's go ahead and start with the first one. And Daniel, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you again. What do you hope for your family, friends, and community?
Yeah. So, kind of when I think about what I want for my family, my friends, and my community, all kind of stems down to the same thing of I want them to be safe in a country that has representatives and has a government that has their best interests at heart. Whether that's, a government that, you know, provides things for them, that provides healthcare, provides education, because I think that everyone deserves to, like I said before, deserves for their voice to be heard, and everyone truly deserves a representative government that they can trust. And so I just hope that for my friends and family and community, that they remain safe and they remain proud and they remain happy, so that they can um, continue to grow in a country that we all can build together.
Erica, would you like to answer the same question?
Yeah, sure. So, in terms of what I always hope for is that they have means of being connected to folks. I think that connection is really important, and I suppose that answers the second question as well. But connection is super important to me, and so it could also answer the third question, but really when driven by connection, I hope that everyone has the opportunity to engage with one another, because I think that that's a really needed opportunity in any aspect of a person's life.
Yeah, these are great answers, you guys. Thank you. And Ella, would you want to answer the first question as well?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what Daniel and Erica said, I think that sort of connections, trust, and relationships are sort of at the heart of that, and like having an environment that helps you grow in those relationships and like live them out to their fullest end is really important.
Yeah, I would say I definitely agree with all of you. I think the word safety has come up a lot here, and that's first and foremost what I always hope for my family and friends and community. I think I also hope for, I just hope that they can live like the happiest life that they can, and that they can pursue whatever they want to pursue in life, and like realize their potential and things like that. Let's do the same thing and go through the second question. Let's start with Ella, though. Ella, what would you say your best friend says about who you are? That's kind of hard.
Yeah, I know. I wish they were here so they could say it, not me. I think they'd probably say that I'm pretty silly and goofy. I think they'd say that I care a lot about, like, I get passionate about like a little thing and then I go full in, dive deep and follow it like, all the way through. So I'm like really into hobbies or like little side projects I get really invested in. And then I think they'd say that I sort of like carry that drivenness and purposefulness into like the academic side of my life and the professional side of my life as well. So I try to be invested in the community too.
I think those are pretty accurate as someone who's been working with you for a couple months now. What about you, Erica? What would your best friend say about you?
She'd probably say that I'm brutally honest. I'm very much known to speak my mind, even when it is an unpopular opinion or probably an inappropriate time to do so. And I think just because it's my best friend, the walls are down all the more. And so she would just know that I'm going to do that, especially to her. I think in other spaces, I will bite my tongue, but when it's with my best friend who I've known since we were 5, absolutely not.
Oh yeah, she sees that side of you. And what about you, Daniel?
Yeah, so I actually I was looking at that question, and I was kind of like trying to hold in my laughter, because um my friend and I, like, she of course like would kind of just say like I'm like really nice and sweet and kind until we start talking about disenfranchisement, or like voting rights and like everything voting. I just turn into something crazy. But I remember one time we actually had a conversation, and I was just asking her like random hypotheticals, but I asked her like, if you really needed to get my attention, like you needed to um get my attention fast, like what would you do? And she said, honestly, I would scream, hey Daniel, there's someone who's not registered to vote. And I thought it was the funniest thing because I immediately said like, wait, who's not registered? So I would hope that they would say that I'm very passionate about the work that I do, and very passionate about getting people engaged in the voting process and being civically active.
I think that story might be a sign that you are in the right line of work, Daniel. I think all of you said some sort of passionate or driven, which makes sense. That you guys are all working for CEEP right now, and it makes me excited for CEEP. I think my best friend would also probably say something along those lines. That I'm very passionate and very, I think, kind of similar to what you were saying, Erica. That I am not afraid to like speak my mind. And obviously, with your best friend, that comes out more so than in other settings. So I think I'm definitely with you guys there. I hope that they would also say I'm very kind in the same in the same respect. Um, let's see. Let's tackle our last question here. And I'll start with Erica this time. What sense of purpose would you say guides you in your life? I feel like this one kind of wraps up the other two. So I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say.
Yeah, I think I alluded to it in the first response, but really it's to connect folks. I think that in being in a higher education setting, my goal is to connect other people with each other, but I suppose with my own personal life, I want to be connected to folks and feel that sense of belonging among a community or a group of people. And so my purpose in life is really to do that for myself and for others, even if it involves a brutal amount of honesty.
I can appreciate that. Um, let's go with Daniel. What would you say your purpose in life is?
Yeah, so I guess kind of thinking about like kind of the purpose that guides me in my life is, um, when I was growing up, we didn't have a lot, and we had to, make do with what we had, and kind of like how we went about life. And I always knew that school was important, get your education, go to college, and get a really nice job. But I, from a really early age, just knew that there were a lot of other people that didn't have as much as we did. There was a lot of people who really suffered in our country, and so I really wanted to dedicate my, life and go to school because I just really wanted to help people. I really thought that the role of government and the role of being able to go and vote is to get the help that you need, and so that we can build each other up and build a greater country. And so those are kind of the purpose that, that guides me in my life and my day to day.
What about you, Ella?
Um, Both my parents are teachers, and a lot of my like extended family is too. So I think that from childhood, I've really cared a lot about education, and I think that like reaching an understanding through learning is like a really important way of bringing people into spaces they weren't in before. There's this concept of like going to the margins, and that's something that as I've grown older, I've really cared about is that like reaching out to people who are in the margins and bringing them into the center of the fold. And so I think I'd like to like spend the rest of my life working on that and on like bettering the lives of the people around me.
That's so interesting. I've never thought of it that way because we work in voter engagement. So obviously, all of us want the best for our world, and we want the best for others. I've never thought of it as bringing like the people on the margin to the center. That's really interesting. I would say my sense of purpose is definitely right alongside a lot of yours. I think it's just to help others in whatever way that may like form, whatever form that may take. So now that we've answered these questions to get to know each other and our values a little bit better, let's talk about what those values then translate to in our ideal America. So I have two questions here I want to go over. The first one is describing your ideal America based on your values that we just talked about and our shared history. The second one is what's your personal commitment to creating that America that you want? So why don't we just go through each person and you can answer them both at the same time? Because I feel like they flow right into the other. So, well, does anyone want to go first and try to tackle these questions? Go for it, Daniel.
Yeah. So in the ideal world of like just everything's perfect, my ideal America would be, voter voter participation is at 100%, and everyone is able to have um, very productive discussions on the issues that we face and the different problems that individually we face every day. And their representatives that represent them in Congress or in the state legislature or their city council all have, the values and their ideals in their mind when they're making legislation. And so the new laws that we create help build us up from the ground up, and it helps everyday Americans, have the bright future that we all should have. And it allows everyone to feel as though that their voice matters and everyone's voice will matter and does matter. Um, that's kind of like my ideal American. Everything just runs smoothly from there on out. But when talking about like my personal commitment to creating America, um, you know, in all seriousness of like getting a lot of people more engaged and having the voter turnout to 100% of eligible voters, I really do think that my personal commitment would be, my work with CEEP and getting as many people registered as possible. I actually carry my phone and my iPad around quite often, and if I meet someone, I'm always that weird guy who's like, "Hey, are you registered to vote?" And they're always like, "Oh," if they even hesitate, I will, pull up my phone. I'm like, "Oh, it's okay. We can check right now," because I have the link and everything on my phone, so they're able to register off my phone because it only takes 2 minutes, and so they're able to register and do all that stuff. So I think my commitment is just being very proactive when it comes to voter registration and just very um, in your face when it comes to getting registered and being active.
So what I'm hearing from Daniel is that if you are friends with Daniel, you will be registered to vote. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
I will not have it. You have to be registered to vote, be my friend.
It is the first and only requirement. um, thank you. Thanks for tackling those questions first. Erica, do you want to talk about your ideal America and your commitment to it?
Yeah, sure. So, on the theme of commitment in terms of like my own values and thinking about how they are in relationship to both commitment and I suppose the first question as well, um, my biggest value being connectivity. I think the ideal America for me would be one in which folks feel connected. There's a lot of disconnect. There's a lot of polarity. There's a lot of things happening right now, um, and I don't think that I necessarily want everyone to agree on everything. I'm not that utopian in my brain, but certainly feel connected enough to have these conversations like the one that we are pursuing right now, and to have this space where they feel like they are connected enough to people to trust that that space will be open to that conversation. And so my own personal commitment to creating that space or the America that I want is, as I mentioned before, working in higher education. I think that as folks, for traditional age students, this is really the soiree into the voting age for them. And so to be able to work at organizations like CEEP or do my own thing to increase commitment and sort of connectivity to this work among those students is really valuable to me. So that's what I've been doing.
I think that's a great ideal America, being connected and like supporting each other and making sure that we all find a space within this country to be able to have conversations. I think that's really great. And last but not least, Ella, what does your ideal America look like?
I think it would be good to get away from the either or dialogue that sort of is prevalent across the country and get into more of like a both and dialogue. I think that sometimes we get caught in seeing things as like black or white, yes or no, like there's only these two options that we're forced to choose between. And I'd want to like live in America where we can find compromise or like pick both. if we're trying to balance isolationism with internationalism, we can find a middle ground that, if we're looking between personal freedom and domestic security, there's going to be a middle ground. And so I'd like to, I guess, live in America where we can have a conversation that addresses the needs of persons and individuals, but also tackles these larger theoretical issues. And I guess, well, I'm studying international studies, so I'm trying to live out that commitment. And then I think by encouraging people to vote, because that's one way you're able to express your individual values on a national stage.
I feel like we covered quite a few perspectives here. We have like an international perspective, we have a higher education perspective, we have voter engagement. I appreciate all of this. I would say my ideal America. My ideal America is one where everyone feels that they can participate in their government in whatever form that takes in their community. I personally am a big person on local government and like local community organizations, and so I do a lot of work outside of CEEP to help build up my neighborhood, like my little 2,000 people neighborhood, because I think your community and your local government is really important. And so I would just like to see more participation from everyone. I would love to see everyone participating. And then my personal commitment to creating that, I think, is definitely doing it by example. I think my personal commitment is participating and then showing others that you can participate and this is how you participate. And kind of like what Daniel was saying, if you are my friend, you live in my neighborhood, I have told you to go check out our neighborhood association. I definitely come at it from a different perspective of like small community organizations, but it also translates to voting as well, which is why I think my personal commitment is also doing this work with CEEP and trying to like expanding beyond my local community and trying to help people vote all across the country. So looking back on our conversation, how would you say that our views of our ideal America and maybe our commitment to it are similar? And anyone who has an answer for that can speak up.
I would say that our ideals for the ideal America are similar because we just ultimately just want what's best for our country and what's best for everyone, and we want to see a fair system that really just highlights what it means to just be in the country and be in a democracy where we are able to choose who represents us, and choose who actually passes our legislation or writes and passes our legislation. So I think they're similar in the sense of like we want what's best, we want a safe and prosperous America.
I think that's definitely true. What about the differences in our ideal America?
Do you want me to answer that or someone
Yeah,
else?
if you want to.
Yeah.
Anyone can answer it.
I think in the grand scheme of our ideas, I personally didn't see a lot of difference. There might have been like difference of like how to like really obtain our goals. But I think the difference is welcomed because the different ways of doing it are all equally important to having that ideal America set before us.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think I think I highlighted our differences earlier when I said we're coming at this from different perspectives, like an international relations lens. Or Erica, you had a higher ed lens. Daniel, you had like a voter engagement lens. And I know my lens personally was like local government. And so I think it was really cool how we all got to highlight a different aspect, how we can still live out those values. Because I think they're all very important. All right. So let's get straight to voting. We are a voter engagement organization, so it would be silly of us not to talk about voting in this training today. Our second topic is to vote or not to vote. 2018 was a record-breaking midterm election year with a 50-year high 47.5% of Americans participating. It's stark contrast to 2014 midterm elections with the lowest midterm election voter turnout since World War II. But still, half of Americans stayed home, even at those high percentages. Many people are wondering what kind of turnout 2020 is going to bring and beyond. So, what is it about voting that inspires us to participate or turn away? Feeling it's not worth our effort? Or is there some other reason? In this conversation, I want to talk about what voting means to you. Is it a choice? Is it an obligation? And what might lead us to vote and what might lead us not to vote? We're going to go ahead and skip all of the introductions since we're sticking with the same group here, and we'll jump right into the deep conversations here. So, are you registered to vote? What led you to that decision? And then also, let's go ahead and answer the second question as well. Was there a point in your life when you didn't think voting was important? And if so, why not? Let's start with Ella. You want to answer the first two questions here?
Yes, so I am registered to vote. So I moved to the University of Mississippi when I was 17, and I got involved with Mississippi Votes, just sort of by chance through a friend right away. They're a statewide sort of organization dedicated to nonpartisan voter engagement. And so I was involved with them before I was even old enough to register to vote. So I was ready and active the second I turned 18 and signed off on that voter registration paperwork right away. So there wasn't really a point where I didn't think voting was important because I was really in it from the very start.
That's really cool. I never think about people getting engaged before they're 18, but talk about being ready to go. What about you, Erica?
Yeah, so growing up, my dad is not a citizen, he's on a green card. And he would always talk to me about as soon as I was 18, like I was going to vote because he can't vote, but he's really passionate about it. And he doesn't want to switch his citizenship for other reasons, but if it was just about voting, he would have. And so from the time that I can remember, so very, very little, I've always known that I was going to register to vote for very personal familial reasons and having that be imparted on me very young. And I think in that, there wasn't really ever a time where I didn't think that voting was important. I have no delusions of like knowledgeable childhoodness to say that I knew like how important it would be to me. But I never really had the opportunity to even question whether it was really important because my dad from probably before elementary school would talk to me about voting. So I've always thought it's important and that it was a decision of mine, but very much influenced by family.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I know your family can have a huge impact in whether or not you're a voter. What about you, Daniel? Did you always think that voting was important?
Yes, definitely. Only because it's like just been like I don't want to like because I can see the questions ahead, so I don't want to like jump too far down. But I've always it's always been important in my family to vote. Just because of the sheer fact that people have died for our right to vote. People have risked their lives. People have advocated their entire lives. And one of my inspirations was now the late Representative John Lewis and just his work that he did for so many millions of people across this country, to really drive the importance of why it's important to vote and why it's important to have a loud voice in our system. Because I mean, it's not only a me thing, it affects everyone else. It affects me, my family, my community. And so I've always thought it's been important to, to vote, just to do my civic duty.
I'm going to skip around here really quick. Let's touch on how important voting was in your family, if you feel comfortable answering that. I know, Erica, you talked about it a little bit. You're welcome to expand on it, but I'd love to hear from you guys, Daniel and Ella, about voting in your family and what that looked like. Let's see. Let's go back to Ella again.
I like remember my parents voting as a kid, and we definitely talk about like politics every now and then when it's relevant in the household, but it's never been families never really talked a lot about voting. It's more with like friends, and as I've like come in age in college that I've started to care more about voting.
I think my story more aligns with yours, Ella. Voting was not, I'm sure they did it. I'm sure my parents voted, but they never talked about it. We definitely didn't talk about politics. It was kind of like a subject you don't talk about, you don't bring up, you know. And it wasn't until I got to college, because the 2016 election was a huge election, and that happened right after I moved to college, and it was very influential in my career path. And so I don't think it was until I like went off to college that it became a more important thing to me. Um, what about you, Daniel?
Yeah, so it's always been super important, and like you said, like I never like really, my parents never talked about voting. It wasn't until like recently, like when I like started doing voter engagement, that I was like, "Are you registered to vote? Like, are you voting?" And it's like, to my surprise, my mom was like, "Yeah, we actually all vote like all the time. Um, like we vote in every single election, local, state, federal." And I was just like so like happy to hear her say that. So it's always been really, really super important in my family. It's always been really stressed. And I actually, I've also um moved away from home. So my first time, voting, I went back home to vote in like my hometown. And I voted with my mom for the first time, and it was such a like and really awesome moment, because we got to go and we vote together, and it was just a really great time, just because generations of black people just have not been able to vote, and still we still face some issues today, and so just being able to just go in and submit a ballot is just like everything.
I, yeah, that's really cool. Um, and like we said earlier, you can't be related. You can't associate with Daniel unless you're registered to vote. We already talked about that.
Yeah, absolutely not. I like my dad was like, "Oh, I don't know if I'm gonna vote," and I like actually like scolded him for about 3 minutes about all the reasons why he should, and he is actually going to go vote.
That's good. Doing the good work. Erica, I know you touched on your family a little bit and the importance that voting had on you. Do you want to expand on that at all?
Sure, yeah, I'll just add, I wasn't just raised by my father, so my mom was in the picture as well. And um, for her, voting was something that was deeply personal, given the time that she grew up. So my mom is a baby boomer. And so she grew up in the civil rights era and was a part of the uh, Vietnam War protests in the early 70s, that 100,000 college student day in Washington, D.C. She was there. And so she was like, probably even more like, I talk about my dad because that's so like formative and emotional for me, but my mom was just like logistically kind of like what I'd imagine Daniel might be like to their family, and being like that, no, you will. So my dad had the plea and my mom had the force. So it was definitely important to my family. That might be
So
an understatement.
cool. It was actually so awesome.
That is really cool. It's a good combination. You said like one had the emotional aspect and one had the logistical, like putting the foot down, you will go get registered to vote. That is very cool. So the last question that I want to tackle today is voting an obligation or a choice? I think that one is kind of interesting. So does anyone want to answer that first? Let's go to Daniel again.
um, I think everyone by now already knows my answer, but it is definitely an obligation. Definitely an obligation not only to yourself but to other people. And if you care and love about anyone in this country, anyone at all, that I think voting is an obligation.
What about you, Erica?
So yeah, I think it's funny because, or not funny, but voting inherently includes choices. And so it is theoretically a choice in the selection. But I think in terms of having a functioning democracy, the right to vote and the commitment to it are obligations from both like the institutional side and the individual side.
That's interesting. I like that. What do you think, Ella?
Well, I don't really like picking between two things, and I feel like on one hand, obligation is sort of like a negative connotation. There's like that you're like obliged to do something. And then choice like implies that like choosing not to vote is of equal merit of choosing to vote. So I feel like either way you're in a pickle. I feel like duty is probably like a better way to phrase like what our relation to voting is, because it's something you ought to do. Like of course you have the freedom to choose not to vote, but that is the choice that like takes away your own voice and rights and powers. So you ought to choose to vote. So I don't know. I think I'd rather just say voting is a duty than an obligation or a choice.
I think that's also a really good point on that, because I also kind of sit between these two. Um, I I think that voting is a choice, and I think it should be a choice by the individual, but I think we should have a better system so that everyone gets to make that choice. Because I think what's unfair is that not everyone even gets to have the choice just because of like voter disenfranchisement or logistics or things like that. So I think everyone should have the choice, and that I want to like help secure that choice. But I still, at the end of the day, kind of think it's a choice. But I always tell people the way, Daniel, you said that you make sure everyone's registered to vote. I always like to tell people that if you don't vote, you don't get a complaint either. So
Exactly.
if you aren't getting up and participating, then you don't get to complain about the results either. And if you're unhappy with the results, come participate the next time. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. So similar kind of reflection questions here. And I'm going to pick on someone other than Daniel because I think you answered both of them last time. So Erica or Ella, how would you say our views of voting are similar?
I can go first. It actually sounds like our sort of opportunity related values are very similar, where we want folks to take advantage of the opportunity given to them and engage with such an opportunity. Um, and so I think the prevailing theme across it, whether it be choice or obligation, was that if made available to you, there is some draw to doing what you can to give yourself the opportunity to either make that choice or fall in line with that obligation, whether how you phrase it. And I'm actually curious for the next question about how folks would feel about voting, but voting as like an abstention. Like, does is an abstention like a vote, a choice? Does it fulfill the obligation to take part in it? Like, here I am stirring the pot, getting ready for the second.
We'll have to make a part 2 where we answer those deeper questions. Is abstaining fulfilling the obligation? Let's see. How are our views of voting different? Ella, do you want to try and tackle that one?
That one's a little bit trickier, I think, because we all sort of really phrased our answers in very different ways. It sort of felt like so with the last dialogue on our views of future America, we all had like the same end but different means of getting there. And then with this question, we all have different answers. Like we picked obligation or choice. We had the same route of like thought process and of like why our answers were valid for getting to those two things. Like we all agree that people should vote, but maybe we just sort of disagree on like what definition that falls under. So maybe it's just semantics.
I actually think that's an awesome point because I think you see that a lot in policy debates or issue debates that we have either the same means but different ends, or we come to the same outcome but we have a different way of getting there. I think you see that all the time. So that's a really good point, Ella. Thank you. Okay, so now that we've gone through our two topics, we have to tackle the hard part, which is taking everything that we talked about today and applying it to your experiences in your fellowship. So we realize that you can't walk through an activity like this in maybe the 2-minute conversation you might have with someone, either like on social media or texting them or just as they come to your registration booth. But you can ensure that they walk away from that small conversation with a better opinion of voting and of like talking about politics. I think there's a few things we've learned in this conversation that we can take with us and use in every small conversation that we have. And I would say the main takeaway is those guidelines I went over at the very beginning. And I think that our participants here today really were great examples of using those guidelines. I think they should be brought into every conversation that you have. When you listen to the person that you're talking to and you're thinking about what they're saying rather than crafting what you're going to say in response to that, I think it makes a really big difference in the conversation. The other people in the conversation can tell that you are genuinely listening to understand, and you might actually learn something in the process. Every person has a slightly different perspective, but just as thought out as yours, and you can learn a lot from everyone that you meet. In our current political atmosphere, it's sometimes really hard to find a conversation with these guidelines, especially at a tabling event, a debate watch, or any other setting, especially online on social media. That can be really hard to have these kinds of conversations. But if you can establish this assumed respect between you and the person you're having this conversation with, I think it might make them more open to conversations like this in the future, and maybe even to voting if they are traditionally a non-voter. One recommendation I would make in trying to hold these conversations is it's best to stay away from hot topic issues right up front, maybe even the topic of voting, kind of depending on the political atmosphere of your state or your college. I think politics is full of a lot of like words that people already have a preconceived notion about those words. So if you say like conservative or liberal, people already have a connotation associated with that word, whether it is negative or positive or somewhere in between. And they might make assumptions about the conversation before you even have it. So I think talking about less hot topic issues and maybe even staying away from what people normally associate as politics, like immigration or healthcare or budgets or things like that, might help draw someone in who might not normally have this kind of conversation with you. So I would recommend starting with questions like, what do you want our country to be like? Or what's your biggest concern for your community? What are you studying? See what they're passionate about. Because as you can see here, we all studied the things that we are passionate about. So maybe you can find a way in that conversation to link the power of voting and the power of getting involved in your politics to whatever subject that they might be passionate about. If you want to dig deeper into these conversations, which it sounds like Erica's already like ready to dig deeper, You can also host your own living room conversations. Just go to livingroomconversations.org. Their team provides a lot of resources for hosting your own living room conversations on campus. We went with some topics that we thought would be really good for our group here related to voting and your ideal America, but they also cover those hot topics that I mentioned earlier, like immigration, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They have lots of different topics that you can go over and try to establish common ground even in these really like hot topics, these really difficult topics. The goal of these dialogues is to learn from the people around you and also let them learn from you. It's also to create common ground and provide a safe space for contentious conversations like these. And so if this sounds like something you'd like to see on your campus or you'd like to hold virtually, ask your state director, or you can email Courtney, our national director, and we will help you make that happen. And lastly, if you have any questions about living room conversations, please feel free to, again, talk to your state director or email our national director, Courtney. Thank you all for joining us. Be sure to check out and follow us on social media or visit our website at campuselect.org. Happy engaging.